I sat in my car outside the Morrison and Associates corporate headquarters at midnight, hands trembling as I deleted the last security footage from my phone. 4 hours ago, I watched Amanda Sterling, the boss's daughter, collapse during the board meeting when the FBI agents walked in. 4 hours ago, Amanda's smug smile finally disappeared. But 12 hours ago, I was just another overlooked employee watching my dream promotion get handed to the boss's unqualified daughter. What happened in those crucial 4 hours changed everything forever. The morning started like any other Tuesday in March, except I arrived at the office 30 minutes early with butterflies dancing in my stomach. After 5 years of dedication at Morrison and Associates, today was supposed to be my day. The senior marketing director position had my name written all over it, or so I believed. I'm Mabel Richardson, 28 years old, and I'd poured my heart into this marketing firm since graduating from Northwestern. My client acquisition record spoke for itself: 43 new accounts in the past year alone, each one bringing in substantial revenue. I developed innovative social media strategies that increased our client engagement rates by 215%. My campaigns for Peterson Electronics and Hartwell Real Estate had won regional advertising awards. Every performance review glowed with praise from supervisors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I settled into my cubicle, reviewing my presentation notes one final time. Around me, the office buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew about the 10 o'clock announcement. "Morning, Mabel," called Jake Patterson from the maintenance department as he wheeled his cart past my desk. Jake was one of those invisible employees who somehow knew everything happening in the building. His gray coveralls were always spotless, and his weathered face held the wisdom of someone who'd worked corporate America for decades. "Big day today," I replied, unable to hide my excitement. Jake's expression shifted slightly, but before he could respond, our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Helen Rodriguez, the HR director. Helen strutted through the office like she owned the place, her red power suit commanding attention. She'd been with the company for 8 years and had developed a reputation for being Morrison's right hand in all personnel matters. "All hands meeting in the conference room," Helen announced loudly. "Mr. Morrison has an important announcement regarding the senior marketing director position." My heart raced as employees began filing toward the large conference room. Tom Bradley from finance looked particularly nervous, constantly adjusting his tie and checking his watch. Tom had always been anxious about company meetings, but today his unease seemed more pronounced than usual. The conference room filled quickly. I found a seat in the third row, close enough to show enthusiasm, but not so close as to appear presumptuous. My colleagues chatted excitedly around me, and I caught several supportive glances. Everyone knew I deserved this promotion. Robert Morrison entered the room at exactly 10 o'clock, his silver hair perfectly styled and his navy suit impeccable. At 62, he commanded respect through sheer presence. He'd built this company from nothing 25 years ago, and his business acumen was legendary in Chicago's marketing circles. "Good morning, everyone," Morrison began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Today marks an exciting milestone for Morrison and Associates. We're expanding our leadership team with a new senior marketing director." I straightened in my chair, my palms growing damp with anticipation. "This position requires exceptional vision, innovative thinking, and the ability to lead our company into the future," Morrison continued. "After careful consideration, I'm pleased to announce that Amanda Sterling will be joining us in this capacity." The words hit me like a physical blow. Amanda Sterling. I'd heard that name before, but surely there was some mistake. A young woman entered the conference room, and my confusion transformed into devastating clarity. Amanda Sterling was Morrison's daughter. I recognized her from the family photos scattered around Morrison's office. She was 26, blonde, and carried herself with the confidence that came from never facing real adversity. Polite applause filled the room, but I could hear the underlying murmur of confusion from my colleagues. Amanda had only been with the company for 6 months, hired straight from her MBA program at Kellogg. Her resume was impressive on paper, but her practical experience consisted of assisting with minor social media updates and attending client meetings as an observer. "Thank you, everyone," Amanda said, stepping to the front of the room. Her voice was smooth and practiced, the product of expensive education and countless networking events. "I'm thrilled to take on this leadership role. I look forward to working with all of you, especially those who have so much to learn from fresh perspectives." Her eyes found mine in the crowd, and something in her smile made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about qualifications or company politics. This felt personal. "I want to especially thank the hardworking associates who've laid the groundwork for this department's success," Amanda continued. "People like Mabel Richardson, whose dedication to basic tasks has been truly admirable. I hope to mentor associates like Mabel as they develop their skills." Basic tasks. The phrase echoed in my head as my face burned with humiliation. Around me, colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My innovative campaigns had just been reduced to basic tasks by someone who'd never generated a single dollar of revenue. The meeting concluded with Morrison outlining Amanda's new responsibilities, which included overseeing all the accounts I developed and managed. As people filed out of the conference room, I remained seated, trying to process what had just happened. "Mabel," a voice called softly. I looked up to see Amanda approaching her smile, now private and calculating. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" We moved to a quiet corner of the hallway away from the dispersing crowd. Amanda's demeanor shifted completely now that we were alone. "I want you to know that I specifically requested you be reassigned to junior associate," she said quietly. "My father was going to let you keep your current position, but I convinced him that someone with your attitude problems needed to learn some humility." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed for maximum impact. I stared at her, speechless. "Don't look so shocked," Amanda continued. "You've been coasting on mediocre work for years. It's time someone with real vision took charge. Your new responsibilities will include administrative support filing and general office assistance. Think of it as a learning opportunity." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway, my 5 years of dedication crumbling around me. The promotion hadn't just gone to someone else, it had gone to someone who actively wanted to destroy me. The next 3 weeks felt like a masterclass in professional humiliation. Amanda wasted no time establishing her authority and my new place in the company hierarchy. My corner desk, with its view of the Chicago River, was reassigned to someone else, replaced by a cramped cubicle next to the copy machine. The constant humming and paper jams became the soundtrack to my diminished career. Amanda's management style revealed itself quickly. She assigned me tasks that were deliberately demeaning, fetching coffee for client meetings I had once led, filing paperwork for campaigns I had designed, and taking detailed notes during strategy sessions where my input was no longer welcomed. Each task came with a patronizing smile and a comment about learning the fundamentals. "Mabel, darling," Amanda would say in front of other employees, "could you make sure the conference room is properly set up? We need 12 chairs, fresh water pitchers, and please double-check that the projector works. I know technology can be challenging for some people." The most painful part was watching Amanda take credit for my work. The Peterson Electronics campaign, which had taken me 3 months to develop and had resulted in a $2 million contract renewal, suddenly became Amanda's brilliant strategy. During client presentations, she would reference my innovative approach, while I sat silently taking notes. My former colleagues began treating me differently. Some avoided eye contact when we passed in the hallways. Others offered sympathetic smiles that felt more pitying than supportive. The office whispers followed me everywhere. "Did you hear about Mabel?" I overheard Sarah from accounting telling someone by the water cooler. "I heard she really messed up that Hartwell account. Maybe the demotion was necessary." But I hadn't messed up anything. Amanda had simply rewritten history, and people were eager to believe the boss's daughter over the employee who'd been humbled. 2 weeks into my new role, I gathered the courage to approach Helen Rodriguez in HR. Helen's office was decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and success ironies that weren't lost on me as I sat across from her imposing desk. "Helen, I need to discuss what happened with my position," I began carefully. "I believe there may have been some discrimination in the promotion process." Helen leaned back in her leather chair, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the desk surface. "Mabel, honey, I think you need to adjust your expectations. Mr. Morrison made a business decision based on what's best for the company. But my performance reviews were exemplary. My client retention rate was the highest in the department. I brought in more new business than anyone else." Helen actually laughed, a sharp sound that made me flinch. "Oh, sweetie, is that what you think? Amanda has shown me some concerning patterns in your work. Late submissions, client complaints, attitude issues with team members. Maybe this reassignment is exactly what you need to refocus." I stared at her, realizing that Amanda had been building a case against me that I didn't even know existed. What client complaints? What late submissions? "I'm not at liberty to discuss specific details, but I'd suggest you focus on your current responsibilities instead of dwelling on what you think you're entitled to," Helen said dismissively. "Corporate hierarchy exists for a reason, Mabel. Amanda has the education and vision this company needs. Maybe you can learn something from her leadership style." I left Helen's office feeling more isolated than ever. The system wasn't just broken, it was actively working against me. That evening, I sat in my small apartment staring at the stack of bills that my reduced salary would barely cover. The pay cut had been substantial, almost 30% justified as compensation aligned with responsibilities. My relationship with Derek, my boyfriend of 2 years, began showing strain as well. Derek worked in construction and had never fully understood the corporate world, but he could see what the stress was doing to me. "Maybe you should just find another job," he suggested over dinner one night. "This place is obviously toxic." "It's not that simple," I explained for the 100th time. "I have 5 years invested here. My reputation in the industry is tied to Morrison and Associates. If I leave now, especially after this demotion, it looks like I failed." Derek's frustration was evident, but he didn't understand that walking away would validate everything Amanda was saying about my competence. I needed to prove myself to show that I belonged in that senior position. Meanwhile, Amanda's power continued to grow. She took over my biggest client accounts, including the Patterson Motors account that I'd cultivated for 3 years. During the transition meeting, she introduced herself to Michael Patterson as his new strategic partner. "I'm excited to bring some fresh energy to your campaigns," Amanda told Michael while I sat quietly in the corner. "The previous approach was rather outdated, but I have some innovative ideas that will really elevate your brand presence." Michael, who had specifically requested to work with me for the past 2 years, looked confused but polite. "I thought Mabel would continue managing our account. We've had excellent results with her strategies." "Oh, Mabel is transitioning to more administrative support roles," Amanda replied smoothly. "But don't worry. You'll be in much more capable hands now." That night, I started doing something I'd never considered before. I began documenting everything. Every email, every meeting, every interaction with Amanda went into a private folder on my personal laptop. I didn't know what I planned to do with the information, but some instinct told me to create a record. I also started paying closer attention to office dynamics I'd previously ignored. Jake Patterson, the maintenance worker, often worked late hours and seemed to notice things others missed. One evening, as I stayed late catching up on the administrative tasks that had piled up, Jake approached my desk. "Working late again?" he asked, emptying my wastebasket. "Always," I replied tiredly. Jake glanced around the empty office, then leaned closer. "Can I give you some advice? Start paying attention to what happens after normal business hours. Sometimes the most interesting conversations happen when people think nobody's listening." Before I could ask what he meant, Jake had moved on to the next desk, leaving me with more questions than answers. 3 weeks after my demotion, the crushing reality of my situation had fully set in. I was trapped in a job where I was systematically being undermined, isolated from colleagues who once respected me, and struggling financially due to my reduced salary. Amanda had successfully orchestrated my professional destruction while positioning herself as the company's rising star. But that Thursday evening, everything changed when I discovered something that would shift the entire game. I was working late again trying to organize files for Amanda's upcoming presentation when I noticed something unusual. Amanda was in Morrison's office after hours, and through the glass walls, I could see them engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Morrison looked agitated, gesturing emphatically, while Amanda seemed to be arguing back. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language suggested this wasn't a typical father-daughter chat about business strategy. Something was wrong, and my instincts told me it had nothing to do with marketing campaigns. As I watched them through the glass partition, Amanda suddenly pulled out her phone and showed Morrison something on the screen. Whatever it was made Morrison's face go pale, and he immediately moved to his computer, typing frantically. That's when Jake appeared beside my desk, startling me from my observation. "Interesting time for a family meeting, isn't it?" he said quietly, his eyes also focused on Morrison's office. "What do you mean?" I whispered back. Jake looked around the empty office once more, then made a decision that would change everything. "Meet me in the supply room on the 3rd floor tomorrow at 6 p.m. There are things you need to know about this company that go way beyond office politics." The next evening, I found myself nervously climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor supply room. The building was mostly empty except for cleaning crews, and my footsteps echoed in the stairwell. I wasn't even sure why I was there, but Jake's cryptic warning had haunted me all day. Jake was already waiting when I arrived, surrounded by boxes of printer paper and office supplies. In the fluorescent light, his weathered face looked more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Before I show you anything, I need to know if you're serious about finding out the truth," he began without preamble. "Because once you know what I know, there's no going back to pretending everything here is normal." "What are you talking about?" I asked, though something in my stomach had already started churning. Jake reached behind a stack of copy paper and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "I've been working maintenance here for 12 years. People think custodial staff are invisible, so they say things around me they wouldn't say around anyone else. They also throw away documents they think nobody will ever see." He opened the folder and spread several papers across a makeshift table of supply boxes. 3 months ago, I started noticing some unusual vendor invoices in Morrison's trash. Companies I'd never heard of billing for services that didn't make sense. I leaned closer to examine the documents. The invoices were for marketing consulting services from firms called Pinnacle Strategy Group, Elite Brand Solutions, and Summit Marketing Consortium. Each invoice was for substantial amounts ranging from $15,000 to $45,000. "I don't recognize any of these companies," I said, studying the paperwork, "and I handle vendor relationships for most of our marketing services." "That's because they don't exist," Jake said grimly. "At least not in any legitimate way. Look at the addresses." I examined the invoices more carefully and felt a chill run down my spine. All 3 companies listed the same address, a P.O. box in Oak Brook, Illinois. But what made it worse was that I recognized that address. It was the same P.O. box listed on Amanda's emergency contact information in her employee file. "This can't be right," I murmured, but even as I said it, pieces were falling into place in my mind. Jake pulled out another set of documents. "It gets worse. These are copies of canceled checks I found in Morrison's office trash. Look at who endorsed them." The checks were made out to the various consulting companies, but the endorsement stamps led back to accounts held by Sterling Financial Management. Amanda's last name was Sterling. "She's been stealing money from the company." I breathed, the full scope of what I was seeing finally sinking in. "Not just her," Jake corrected. "Morrison has been signing off on all these payments. Either he's involved or she's got something on him that's forcing his cooperation." I thought back to the tense conversation I'd witnessed between Amanda and Morrison the night before. Morrison's pale face when Amanda showed him something on her phone suddenly made much more sense. How much money are we talking about? I asked, dreading the answer. Jake pulled out a calculator and a separate sheet where he'd been tracking the fraudulent invoices. In the past 6 months alone, over $400,000, but these are just the documents I've been able to recover. If this has been going on longer, we could be talking about millions. The room felt like it was spinning around me. Why are you telling me this? Why haven't you gone to the police? Because I'm a maintenance worker with a high school education, going up against the owner of a multi-million-dollar company and his MBA daughter, Jake said pragmatically. Who's going to believe me? But you have the financial background to understand these documents. You know how the company's legitimate vendor relationships work. You have credibility. I stared at the evidence spread before me, feeling overwhelmed by the implications. This wasn't just about a stolen promotion anymore. Amanda hadn't just taken my job. She'd engineered my demotion to prevent me from discovering her embezzlement scheme. Your old position would have given you access to all vendor relationships as obs and financial approvals, Jake continued. She needed you out of the way before you stumbled onto this. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Amanda's insistence that I be demoted, Helen Rodriguez's fabricated concerns about my performance, the systematic isolation from colleagues who might have supported me. It had all been calculated to ensure I couldn't interfere with their operation. There's more, Jake said quietly. He pulled out another document that made my blood run cold. It was a draft memo from Helen Rodriguez to Morrison, dated just 3 days ago, outlining a plan to terminate my employment for ongoing performance issues and suspected corporate espionage. Corporate espionage, I gasped. They're planning to frame you, Jake explained. Make it look like you've been stealing company secrets or sabotaging projects. It's the perfect cover story. Who would believe a disgruntled employee who got demoted and then fired? I felt sick. Not only had Amanda destroyed my career and stolen my position, but she was planning to destroy my entire professional reputation to cover up her own crimes. What do we do? I asked, though I already suspected Jake had a plan. We go to the FBI, he said simply. Corporate fraud at this level is a federal crime, but we need more evidence, and we need it fast. That memo suggests they're moving to eliminate you as a potential threat very soon. Over the next hour, Jake explained what he'd already discovered about the scope of the fraud. Amanda's MBA thesis partner, Jessica Chen, owned one of the shell companies. Morrison's brother-in-law was listed as CEO of another. The operation was sophisticated, involving multiple family members and associates. The beautiful thing is that your demotion actually puts you in the perfect position to help, Jake said. Nobody suspects the filing clerk of conducting corporate espionage. You have access to documents you can stay late without raising suspicion, and everyone already thinks you're defeated. I looked at Jake with new respect. This maintenance worker had been conducting a more sophisticated investigation than most corporate security departments could manage. What do you need me to do? I asked. Jake smiled for the first time since our conversation began. Help me gather enough evidence to put them away for a very long time. But understand, this is dangerous. If they suspect what we're doing, they won't hesitate to destroy both of us. As I walked to my car that evening, documents hidden in my briefcase, I realized that my entire perspective had shifted. I wasn't the victim of office politics or nepotism anymore. I was a witness to major corporate fraud, and somehow I'd been chosen to help bring down the people who'd tried to destroy me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Amanda's carefully orchestrated plan to eliminate me as a threat had actually positioned me perfectly to become her worst nightmare. She'd wanted me silent and powerless, but instead, she'd given me access to all the evidence I needed to expose her crimes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the conversation I'd witnessed between Amanda and Morrison, the fear in his eyes and the control she seemed to have over him. Whatever hold Amanda had over her father, it was strong enough to make him risk everything he'd built over 25 years. But I also thought about Jake, this unlikely ally who'd been quietly building a case while everyone else looked the other way. Tomorrow, our real work would begin. Amanda Sterling was about to discover that underestimating people was her biggest mistake. The next morning, I arrived at work with new purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was gathering intelligence. Every document I filed, every meeting I attended, every conversation I overheard became potential evidence in the case we were building. Amanda, completely unaware that her careful plan was unraveling, continued treating me with casual cruelty. But now her condescending comments and deliberate humiliations felt different. She wasn't breaking me down anymore. She was providing evidence of her character and motivations. "Mabel, dear," she said during the morning staff meeting, "I need you to organize all the vendor files from the past year. I'm conducting a comprehensive review of our partnerships to identify any inefficiencies." "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice neutral while inside I celebrated. She was asking me to organize the exact documents that would prove her guilt. As the day progressed, I began to understand the true scope of what we were uncovering. This wasn't just theft. It was a sophisticated money laundering operation that had been systematically draining the company for months. Client funds, operational budgets, and even employee benefits had been diverted through the network of shell companies. Jake and I had 48 hours to gather enough evidence before Amanda and Morrison implemented their plan to fire me, but neither of them knew that we were already 3 steps ahead and their time was running out faster than they could possibly imagine. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the office, I drove to a small coffee shop in downtown Chicago where I'd arranged to meet someone Jake had contacted through anonymous channels. Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division was already waiting when I arrived, her dark suit and serious demeanor immediately identifying her despite the crowded cafe. "Ms. Richardson," she said as I slid into the booth across from her, "I understand you have information about financial irregularities at Morrison and Associates." Agent Chen was around my age, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She'd agreed to this meeting after Jake submitted an anonymous tip through the FBI's online portal, but I could tell she was still evaluating whether our claims had merit. I opened my briefcase and carefully laid out the documents Jake had collected. "This is just the beginning," I said quietly. "We believe the fraud extends much deeper than these initial invoices." Agent Chen examined the paperwork meticulously, occasionally asking questions about company procedures and vendor relationships. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she processed the scope of what we were showing her. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "We can prove at least 6 months, but we suspect it started when Amanda Sterling joined the company in September," I explained. "The timing matches her hiring date perfectly." "And you believe Mr. Morrison is complicit?" I hesitated, thinking about the fear I'd seen in Morrison's eyes during his conversation with Amanda. "I think he's involved, but I'm not sure if he's the mastermind or if he's being coerced somehow." Agent Chen leaned back in her seat. "Miss Richardson, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this table. We've had Morrison and Associates under preliminary investigation for the past 3 months. We received an anonymous tip about potential embezzlement, but we haven't been able to develop sufficient evidence for a warrant." My heart raced. "What kind of evidence would you need?" "Recorded conversations documenting the fraud, access to the actual bank accounts where the money is being transferred, proof of intent and knowledge by the perpetrators." Agent Chen looked directly at me. "The kind of evidence that would require someone with internal access to obtain." I understood what she was asking. "You want me to go undercover? I want you to continue doing your job while wearing a recording device and documenting everything you observe. Your recent demotion actually provides perfect cover. No one suspects a filing clerk of conducting corporate espionage." Jake had been right about that advantage. "What about my safety if they discover what I'm doing?" "We'll have surveillance teams monitoring the building during business hours. You'll have a panic button that connects directly to our response team, and if the situation becomes too dangerous, we extract you immediately." Agent Chen pulled out a small device that looked like a button from a business suit. "This is a state-of-the-art recording system, 12-hour battery life, crystal clear audio quality, and completely undetectable unless someone is specifically looking for surveillance equipment." Over the next 2 hours, Agent Chen briefed me on federal investigation procedures and what kinds of evidence would be most valuable. She explained how financial fraud cases were built and prosecuted and what I could expect if the investigation led to arrest. Based on the amounts you've documented, we're looking at potential sentences of 10 to 20 years for the main perpetrators, she said. Money laundering, wire fraud conspiracy, and theft of employee benefits could result in life-changing consequences for everyone involved. I thought about Amanda's smug confidence and Morrison's fearful compliance. They had no idea how close they were to losing everything. There's something else, Agent Chen continued. Our preliminary investigation suggests this might not be limited to your company. We're tracking similar patterns at 2 other Chicago area businesses. This could be part of a larger criminal enterprise. The scope kept expanding. What had started as a stolen promotion was now connected to a potential organized crime ring. What's my timeline? I asked. We need enough evidence for warrants within the next week. Our sources suggest the perpetrators are planning to accelerate their activities soon, possibly before a major client audit that's scheduled for next month. I realized Amanda's comprehensive vendor review wasn't about identifying inefficiencies. She was trying to clean up the evidence before external auditors discovered the fraud. I'll do it, I said, accepting the recording device. But I want full immunity and witness protection if necessary. Agent Chen smiled for the first time since our meeting began. Ms. Richardson, if you help us build this case, the Justice Department will ensure your safety and your future employment prospects. Corporate whistleblowers are protected by federal law. I returned to work the following day with new purpose. The recording device was sewn into the lining of my blazer, invisible but capturing every conversation within 20 feet. I began each day by documenting my activities in a secure notebook that I kept locked in my car. Amanda's behavior became increasingly erratic as the week progressed. She seemed paranoid about office security, frequently checking to make sure doors were locked and computers were password protected. She also began having more frequent private conversations with Morrison, many of which took place after normal business hours. On Wednesday evening, I witnessed the breakthrough conversation that Agent Chen needed. Amanda and Morrison were in his office discussing the upcoming audit, and their voices carried clearly through the glass walls. The Patterson account shows discrepancies that could trigger additional scrutiny, Amanda was saying. We need to create documentation showing those consulting payments were legitimate. Morrison's voice was strained. Amanda, I'm uncomfortable with how far this has gone. Maybe we should consider voluntary disclosure before the audit. Don't be ridiculous, Amanda snapped. We're talking about over $2 million now. Voluntary disclosure means prison time for both of us. We stick to the plan. $2 million. The fraud was far more extensive than Jake and I had discovered. What if someone has already noticed the irregularities? Morrison asked nervously. Amanda laughed coldly. Who would notice? I made sure anyone with analytical skills was demoted or transferred away from sensitive accounts. That pathetic Mabel Richardson was the only real threat, and look how easily she was neutralized. My face burned with anger, but I forced myself to remain calm and ensure the recording device captured every word. The shell companies will be dissolved next week, Amanda continued. The money will be transferred to offshore accounts, and we'll blame any missing funds on computer errors during the audit system upgrade. It's perfect. Morrison sighed heavily. I never wanted this. You said it would be a few small transactions to cover your student loans. Father, you've benefited from every dollar as much as I have. Your Hawaiian vacation, your new Porsche, the expansion of the wine cellar at the house. Don't pretend you're an innocent victim. Their conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering details of money transfers, account numbers, and timeline for destroying evidence. By the time they finished, I had recorded enough evidence to support multiple federal charges. But I also understood something else. Morrison wasn't the mastermind. Amanda had manipulated her own father into participating in her scheme, using his love for her and his desire to provide for his family against him. She'd started small and gradually escalated his involvement until he was too compromised to back out. The next morning, I met Agent Chen in a different location to transfer the recorded conversation. Her reaction was immediate and intense. "This is exactly what we needed," she said after listening to key excerpts. "We're moving forward with warrants immediately. The arrests will happen during your board meeting next Tuesday." "Next Tuesday?" My voice came out as a squeak. "That's only 5 days away. We can't risk letting them destroy evidence or transfer more money offshore. Your recording proves they're planning to accelerate their timeline." Agent Chen leaned forward. "Mabel, I need you to maintain your normal routine for the next 5 days. Don't change anything about your behavior or give them any reason to suspect you know about their activities. Can you do that?" I thought about Amanda's condescending smile, Helen Rodriguez's dismissive laughter, and all the colleagues who'd avoided me since my demotion. In 5 days, they would all understand exactly who the real criminals were. "I can do that," I said firmly. The weekend felt endless. I spent Saturday and Sunday reviewing every detail of what I'd learned, preparing mentally for what was coming. Derek still didn't know the full scope of what I was involved in, and I'd decided it was safer to keep him uninformed until after the arrests. On Monday, I arrived at work to find Amanda in an unusually good mood. She'd scheduled the board meeting for Tuesday at 11 a.m., supposedly to present her comprehensive analysis of operational efficiency opportunities. I now knew the real purpose was to get all the key decision makers in one room while she presented fabricated documentation to cover up the missing money. "Mabel, darling," Amanda said as she passed my desk, "I hope you've prepared excellent notes for tomorrow's presentation. It's going to be quite a show." She had no idea how right she was. Tuesday's board meeting would indeed be quite a show, but not the kind she was expecting. In less than 24 hours, Amanda Sterling's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the Chicago weather matching my nervous energy. I arrived at the office 30 minutes early as had become my habit, but today felt different. Today was the day that months of careful planning would finally come to fruition. Amanda was already in the building when I arrived, which was unusual for her. Typically, she strolled in around 9:30 with a latte and an air of superiority. But this morning, I found her in Morrison's office at 7:15, hunched over a laptop with file boxes scattered around the desk. Through the glass walls, I could see her frantically reviewing documents and occasionally pulling papers from the boxes to shred them. Morrison stood nearby looking haggard and defeated. Neither of them noticed me settling into my cubicle and activating the recording device hidden in my blazer. "Are you sure we have everything covered?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying through the quiet office. "Father, stop worrying," Amanda replied without looking up from her laptop. "I've spent the weekend reviewing every transaction. The board members will see exactly what I want them to see, nothing more." Jake appeared at my desk, his maintenance cart loaded with cleaning supplies. To anyone watching, he was simply beginning his daily rounds, but he leaned close as he emptied my wastebasket. "FBI surveillance team is in position across the street," he murmured quietly. "3 agents in the lobby disguised as delivery personnel. Everything's ready." I nodded slightly, trying to project the image of a defeated employee going through the motions of another meaningless day. The board meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. Agent Chen had told me the arrests would happen during the meeting when all the key players were assembled in one room. At 9 o'clock, board members began arriving. I recognized most of them from company events: Patricia Williams from Williams and Associates law firm, Dr. Michael Park, who represented our healthcare clients, and Jennifer Martinez from Martinez Financial Group. They gathered in the conference room, chatting casually about quarterly projections and market trends. None of them knew they were about to witness the exposure of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Amanda emerged from Morrison's office at 9:30, carrying a thick presentation folder and wearing her most confident smile. She'd chosen a sharp black suit for the occasion, projecting authority and competence. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled and her makeup was flawless. She looked like the successful corporate executive she pretended to be. "Good morning, Mabel," she said cheerfully as she passed my desk. "I trust you're ready to take excellent notes during this important meeting." "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Amanda's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, and I wondered if she sensed something different about my demeanor. But then she smiled that familiar, condescending smile and continued toward the conference room. At 10:45, Amanda called me into Morrison's office for a private conversation. My pulse spiked, wondering if somehow my investigation had been discovered. "Mabel, I need to discuss something important with you before the board meeting." Amanda began closing the office door behind us. Morrison sat behind his desk, looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. "What is it?" I asked, trying to project nervousness rather than the anticipation I actually felt. Amanda moved closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I know you've been accessing files after hours. Security cameras have captured you in areas where you have no business being." My blood ran cold. Had they discovered my evidence gathering? "I don't know what you mean," I said, which was partially true. I'd been careful to only access documents that were part of my legitimate filing responsibilities. "Don't play innocent with me," Amanda snapped. "Someone has been going through vendor records and financial files. Since you're the only person desperate enough to try something so pathetic, it has to be you." I realized she was fishing, trying to gauge my reaction, rather than confronting me with actual evidence. "Amanda, I only access files that are assigned to me. If there's been a security breach, maybe you should check with IT." Morrison spoke up for the first time. "Amanda, maybe we should focus on the board presentation instead of pursuing unfounded suspicions." Amanda whirled around to face her father. "Unfounded, someone is trying to sabotage this company and you want to ignore it." "I think you're being paranoid," Morrison replied, and I caught something in his voice that suggested he was finally growing tired of his daughter's manipulation. Amanda's composure slipped for the first time since I'd known her. "Paranoid? I've worked too hard to build this department's success to let some disgruntled former employee destroy everything." The irony of her words would have been laughable if the situation wasn't so tense. She was accusing me of trying to destroy the company while she was literally stealing millions of dollars from it. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, Morrison said firmly. "We need to focus on the presentation." Amanda glared at both of us, then made a decision that would ultimately seal her fate. "Fine. But after this meeting, I want a full investigation into every file access and security breach, and I want Mabel terminated immediately for industrial espionage." Industrial espionage. Agent Chen had predicted this exact accusation. "You can't fire someone without cause," I protested, playing my role as the confused employee. Amanda smiled coldly. "Oh, I have plenty of cause. Unauthorized access to confidential files, suspicious behavior, attitude problems, and poor performance reviews. Helen has been documenting everything." As we walked toward the conference room, I realized this was Amanda's endgame. She planned to blame any discovered irregularities on a disgruntled employee who had allegedly tried to sabotage the company. My termination for industrial espionage would provide the perfect cover story for any missing money or suspicious transactions. But she didn't know that in approximately 15 minutes, FBI agents would be walking through the front door with federal warrants for her arrest. The conference room filled with board members, senior staff, and key clients who'd been invited to observe Amanda's presentation. I sat in the back corner with my notepad projecting the image of a dutiful administrative assistant while the recording device captured every word. Amanda took her position at the front of the room, her presentation materials arranged perfectly on the table. "Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm pleased to present a comprehensive analysis of our operational efficiency and strategic partnerships." She clicked to her first slide, which showed impressive revenue growth and client retention statistics. Most of the numbers were accurate, carefully selected to present the most favorable picture possible. Over the past 6 months, we've streamlined our vendor relationships and eliminated redundant services, Amanda continued. This has resulted in significant cost savings while maintaining service quality. I knew the truth behind those cost savings. They represented money that had been diverted to shell companies rather than legitimate vendors. Amanda clicked to her next slide, showing a breakdown of vendor payments by category. As you can see, our strategic consulting investments have yielded exceptional returns through improved campaign effectiveness and client satisfaction. The strategic consulting investments were the fraudulent payments to Pinnacle Strategy Group, Elite Brand Solutions, and Summit Marketing Consortium. Amanda was presenting her theft as successful business strategy. Dr. Park raised his hand. Can you provide more details about these consulting firms? I'd like to understand their specific contributions to our success. Amanda's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Certainly. These firms provided specialized market analysis and strategic planning services that enhanced our campaign development process. It was a masterful non-answer that sounded professional while revealing nothing concrete. Amanda had clearly prepared for questions about her fictional consulting partners. Do you have case studies or examples of their specific recommendations? Patricia Williams asked. Before Amanda could answer, the conference room door opened and 3 people in business suits entered. I recognized Agent Sarah Chen immediately, though the board members assumed they were late arrivals to the meeting. Excuse me, Agent Chen said, producing her credentials. I'm Special Agent Chen with the FBI. We have warrants for the arrest of Amanda Sterling and Robert Morrison on charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and confused questions. Amanda's face went completely pale, all her confident composure evaporating in an instant. Morrison stood up slowly, looking like a man who'd been expecting this moment for months. This is ridiculous, Amanda managed to say, though her voice had lost all its authority. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Miss Sterling, Agent Chen replied calmly. We have recorded evidence of your fraudulent activities and detailed financial records showing over $2 million in illegal transfers to shell companies under your control. Amanda's eyes swept the room desperately, finally landing on me. In that moment, I saw the exact instant when she realized I was involved in her downfall. Her expression shifted from shock to fury to something resembling fear. You, she whispered, pointing at me with a trembling finger. You did this. Actually, Agent Chen corrected, you did this to yourself through months of systematic fraud. Ms. Richardson simply helped us document your crimes. As FBI agents placed handcuffs on Amanda and Morrison, the full scope of the investigation became clear to everyone in the room. Board members demanded explanations. Clients questioned their account security. Senior staff members who had enabled or ignored the fraud looked terrified about their own potential liability. Amanda was still staring at me as the agents led her toward the door. You have no idea what you've done, she said, her voice filled with venom. I'll destroy you for this. Ms. Sterling, Agent Chen said firmly, I suggest you focus on cooperating with federal investigators rather than making threats against witnesses. And then they were gone, leaving behind a conference room full of stunned people and the scattered remains of Amanda's fraudulent presentation. Helen Rodriguez, who had been silent during the entire arrest, suddenly stood up and announced she was calling her lawyer. Several other employees who had been complicit in covering up Amanda's activities began making similar declarations. As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The nightmare was finally over. After months of humiliation, isolation, and systematic destruction of my career, justice was being served in the most public way possible. Jake appeared in the doorway and caught my eye, offering a small smile of satisfaction. Our unlikely partnership had succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. The woman who had stolen my promotion, destroyed my reputation, and tried to frame me for corporate espionage was now facing decades in federal prison, and I was no longer the powerless victim she had tried to make me. I was the person who had brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. The hours following the arrests felt surreal. FBI agents swarmed the building, seizing computers, files, and financial records, while employees gathered in small groups whispering about what they'd witnessed. News vans appeared outside as word of the raid leaked to local media. Morrison and Associates, once a respected name in Chicago marketing, was now the center of a federal fraud investigation. I found myself in the unusual position of being both a witness to the chaos and a protected federal informant. Agent Chen had instructed me to remain available for questioning but to avoid discussing details with coworkers or media representatives who might try to contact me. Patricia Williams, the board member who served as the company's legal counsel, took temporary control of operations while federal investigators sorted through evidence. One of her first actions was calling an emergency meeting with all remaining employees. "I want to be clear about something," Patricia announced to the assembled staff. "This investigation involves specific individuals who have already been arrested. Cooperating with federal authorities is not only the right thing to do, it's legally required. Anyone who has information relevant to this case should speak with the FBI agents on site." Several employees immediately approached the federal agents, apparently eager to distance themselves from the fraud scheme. I watched Helen Rodriguez pack her personal belongings while talking frantically on her phone with what I assumed was her attorney. Tom Bradley from finance looked particularly distressed as he reviewed financial records with FBI accountants. I suspected he'd either been involved in processing the fraudulent payments or had willfully ignored obvious red flags to keep his job. Around 3 p.m., Jake approached my desk carrying a box of personal items. "They're releasing me early today," he explained quietly. "FBI wants to conduct formal interviews with key witnesses away from the office environment." I realized that our maintenance worker cover story was no longer necessary. Jake had been the catalyst for exposing the entire scheme, and his methodical evidence collection had provided the foundation for the federal case. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now the real work begins," Jake replied. "Federal prosecutors will need detailed testimony about what we observed and when. There will be depositions, court appearances, and probably months of legal proceedings." Agent Chen appeared at my desk around 4 p.m. "Ms. Richardson, we need to conduct a formal debriefing about your undercover activities. Are you available to come to our field office this evening?" As I gathered my belongings, I noticed several coworkers watching me with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect. The same people who had avoided me during my demotion were now looking at me as the employee who had exposed major corporate corruption. Sarah from accounting approached as I was leaving. "Mabel, I owe you an apology. I believed the rumors about your performance problems. I should have known better." "Thank you," I replied simply. There would be time later for rebuilding relationships with colleagues who had abandoned me during Amanda's campaign of destruction. The FBI field office was a nondescript building downtown, but the interview rooms were equipped with state-of-the-art recording equipment for documenting witness testimony. Agent Chen led me through a detailed recounting of everything I'd observed since my demotion in March. "Your recordings captured approximately 18 hours of incriminating conversations," Agent Chen explained. "Combined with the financial evidence and documentation that Mr. Patterson collected, we have one of the strongest white-collar crime cases our office has developed in years." She showed me a summary of the evidence that had been seized during the raid. The scope of the fraud was even larger than Jake and I had suspected. Amanda had stolen over $2.7 million across 14 months using a network of shell companies and offshore accounts to launder the money. "What about Morrison?" I asked. He seemed more like a victim than a willing participant. Agent Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "That's where your recorded conversations become crucial. The evidence suggests Ms. Sterling manipulated her father through a combination of emotional blackmail and gradual escalation. She started with small requests that seemed legitimate, then gradually increased the scope until he was too compromised to refuse." "Will he face the same charges?" His cooperation with our investigation will be a significant factor in sentencing recommendations. If he testifies truthfully about how the scheme developed and provides complete financial disclosure, prosecutors may recommend reduced charges. I thought about Morrison's obvious distress during his private conversations with Amanda. He'd built his company over 25 years only to see it destroyed by his own daughter's greed. What about the other employees who were involved? Agent Chen consulted her notes. Helen Rodriguez is being charged as an accessory for her role in creating false documentation and intimidating potential witnesses. Several other employees are cooperating fully and will likely face only civil penalties. The interview continued for 3 hours, covering every detail of my observations and interactions with Amanda. Agent Chen was particularly interested in Amanda's psychological manipulation tactics and her systematic approach to eliminating potential threats. Ms. Sterling displayed sophisticated understanding of corporate power dynamics, Agent Chen noted. Her strategy of isolating you while building a false narrative about your competence shows premeditation and calculation. As the interview concluded, Agent Chen addressed the question I'd been avoiding asking. What happens to my career now? Morrison and Associates is obviously finished. Agent Chen smiled for the first time during our formal session. Ms. Richardson, corporate whistleblowers who expose fraud of this magnitude typically find themselves in high demand. Companies want employees with your integrity and analytical skills. Your reputation in the industry will be enhanced, not damaged. She handed me a business card for a victim services coordinator. The federal government provides support for witnesses in cases like this. Career counseling, security assessments, and assistance with employment transitions are all available. I left the FBI building around 8 p.m. with mixed emotions. Relief that the investigation was over, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also uncertainty about what came next. My entire professional identity had been built around Morrison and Associates, and now that foundation was gone. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As I was having coffee and reviewing job search websites, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Richardson, this is Jennifer Martinez from Martinez Financial Group. I was in the board meeting yesterday when the arrests occurred. Jennifer had been one of the board members who witnessed Amanda's downfall. I wanted to discuss a potential opportunity with our firm. We're expanding our corporate security division, and we need someone with your investigative skills and industry knowledge. Over the following week, I received similar calls from 4 other Chicago companies. Word had spread quickly through the city's business community about the employee who had exposed the Morrison and Associates fraud. Instead of damaging my reputation, my role as a federal witness was opening doors to opportunities I'd never imagined. Amanda and Morrison's arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. Federal prosecutors were recommending bail denial for Amanda due to flight risk and the scope of financial assets she'd hidden in offshore accounts. Morrison would likely be released on bond pending trial contingent on surrendering his passport and agreeing to cooperate fully with the investigation. Jake called me Sunday evening with an update from his own FBI debriefing. Prosecutors think Amanda will ultimately accept a plea agreement rather than risk trial. The evidence against her is overwhelming, and federal sentencing guidelines for financial fraud this extensive typically result in 15 to 20 years. What about Morrison? If he continues cooperating and testifies against Amanda's other associates, they're talking about 5 to 8 years with possibility of early release for good behavior. I thought about the fear and regret I'd seen in Morrison's eyes during those late-night conversations with Amanda. He would spend the next several years paying for enabling his daughter's criminal behavior, but at least he would eventually have a chance to rebuild his life. Amanda, however, would spend the prime years of her career in federal prison. The MBA degree she'd used to justify stealing my promotion would be meaningless when she was eventually released. Her carefully constructed image as a rising corporate star had been permanently shattered. As I prepared for bed that Sunday night, I reflected on everything that had changed since that devastating morning in March when Amanda had announced my demotion. 6 months ago, I'd been a dedicated employee, watching my career destroyed by office politics and nepotism. Now I was a federal witness whose integrity and courage had exposed major corporate corruption. The woman who had tried to silence me was facing decades in prison. The system that had enabled my humiliation was being dismantled by federal investigators. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight I could finally sleep peacefully, knowing that justice had been served. Amanda Sterling had learned the hard way that underestimating people based on their current circumstances was a dangerous mistake. The filing clerk she dismissed as powerless had ultimately become the architect of her destruction. 6 months later, I stood in the corner office of Martinez Financial Group looking out at the Chicago River through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was remarkably similar to the one I'd enjoyed at Morrison and Associates before my demotion, but everything else about my professional life had been transformed. My new title was Director of Corporate Risk Assessment, and my responsibilities included investigating potential fraud, conducting due diligence on business partnerships, and developing security protocols for financial institutions throughout the Midwest. The salary was 60% higher than my previous position at Morrison and Associates, and the respect I'd earned as a federal witness had opened doors throughout Chicago's business community. Amanda Sterling's trial had concluded the previous month with a guilty verdict on all charges. The federal jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding her guilty of conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and theft of employee benefits. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to Robert Morrison, had sentenced Amanda to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 12 years. During the sentencing hearing, Amanda had finally shown genuine emotion for the first time since I'd known her. As the judge read her sentence aloud, tears streamed down her face while she realized the full scope of what her greed had cost her. She would be 44 years old when eligible for parole, her MBA degree and corporate aspirations nothing more than memories from a life she'd destroyed through her own choices. Robert Morrison had received a more lenient sentence of 6 years after cooperating fully with federal prosecutors. His testimony against Amanda had been crucial in exposing the complete scope of the fraud scheme, including connections to similar operations in Milwaukee and St. Louis. Morrison's cooperation had also helped recover an additional $800,000 hidden in accounts he'd been unaware of. Helen Rodriguez had pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and received 2 years in minimum security prison plus 3 years of supervised release. Several other Morrison and Associates employees had faced civil penalties but avoided criminal charges by cooperating with the investigation. The company itself had been liquidated to pay restitution to victims with client accounts transferred to other agencies throughout Chicago. The building that had housed Morrison and Associates for 25 years now sat empty, a monument to how quickly corporate success could be destroyed by criminal behavior. Jake Patterson had declined several job offers to start his own corporate security consulting firm. His methodical evidence gathering and attention to detail had impressed FBI investigators who now regularly referred private companies to his services. Jake's firm specialized in helping businesses identify internal fraud before it reached the scale of what we'd uncovered at Morrison and Associates. The beautiful thing about this work, Jake had told me during our last conversation, is that most corporate criminals aren't nearly as smart as they think they are. They leave trails everywhere if you know how to look. My personal life had also undergone significant changes. My relationship with Derek had ended amicably. He'd never been comfortable with the attention and stress that came with being involved in a high-profile federal case. But I'd begun dating Mark Chen, Agent Sarah Chen's partner, who worked in the FBI's Organized Crime Division. Mark understood the demands of federal investigations and appreciated the courage required to stand up to powerful people. The most meaningful development, however, was the work I'd begun doing with other potential whistleblowers. Agent Chen had connected me with a nonprofit organization that provided support and guidance for employees who discovered corporate wrongdoing. My experience with Amanda's systematic intimidation tactics had given me unique insights into how companies tried to silence potential witnesses. Just last week, I'd counseled a young accountant at a manufacturing company who'd discovered her supervisor was falsifying safety inspection reports. The parallels to my own experience were striking: the isolation from colleagues, the false performance reviews, the threats of termination for attitude problems. The most important thing to remember, I told her, is that their attempts to discredit you are actually evidence of the importance of what you've discovered. People don't work that hard to silence someone unless that person represents a real threat to their criminal activities. The accountant had ultimately decided to contact federal regulators about the safety violations, and her courage potentially saved lives by forcing the company to address serious manufacturing defects. These conversations reminded me daily of how my own nightmare had ultimately led to meaningful purpose. Amanda's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed and opened paths I never could have imagined. This afternoon, I was expecting a call from Agent Chen about a new case involving potential securities fraud at an investment firm. The FBI had specifically requested my assistance because the suspected perpetrator was using similar psychological manipulation tactics to what Amanda had employed. Corporate criminals often follow predictable patterns, Agent Chen had explained. Your experience with Ms. Sterling's methods gives you insights that could be crucial in identifying and documenting similar behavior. As I reviewed the preliminary case files, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned during the most challenging year of my professional life. Amanda had taught me unintentionally that temporary defeats often contain the seeds of ultimate victory. Her systematic attempt to destroy my career had actually positioned me perfectly to expose her crimes and build a better future than I'd ever envisioned. The woman who had smiled while stealing my promotion and orchestrating my humiliation was now serving an 18-year federal prison sentence. Meanwhile, the filing clerk she'd tried to silence had become one of Chicago's most respected corporate fraud investigators. The irony wasn't lost on me that Amanda's own actions had created the circumstances that led to her downfall. If she had simply taken the promotion without demoting me, I never would have been in position to discover the evidence Jake collected. If she had treated me with basic professional respect, I might never have been motivated to investigate her activities so thoroughly. But Amanda's need to dominate and humiliate others had ultimately sealed her fate. Her cruelty had made an enemy of someone who could have remained a neutral observer, and her arrogance had blinded her to the threat I represented until it was too late. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. Agent Chen was calling about the new securities fraud case. "Mabel, we've got another situation that could benefit from your expertise. Are you available to consult on a case involving a company president who's allegedly using intimidation tactics against employees who've questioned irregular financial transactions?" "Of course," I replied, already reaching for my notebook. "What can you tell me about the pattern of behavior?" As Agent Chen described the new case, I felt the familiar satisfaction of knowing that my experience with corporate corruption could help protect other employees from the kind of systematic abuse I'd endured. 6 months ago, Amanda Sterling had stood in a conference room full of colleagues and confidently declared my professional irrelevance. She'd believed that power and privilege made her untouchable, that intimidation and manipulation could overcome integrity and persistence. She'd learned too late that sometimes the person you underestimate the most becomes the architect of your destruction. Her smile had disappeared when she realized that the powerless filing clerk she'd dismissed had actually been building the case that would end her freedom. The most important lesson from my experience wasn't about corporate fraud or federal investigations. It was about the power of refusing to accept injustice, even when fighting back seemed impossible. Amanda had tried to convince me that I was powerless, that resistance was futile, that accepting humiliation was my only option. But she was wrong. Justice may be delayed, but it's rarely denied when people have the courage to stand up for what's right. Sometimes the worst betrayal becomes your greatest opportunity to demonstrate your true character. Today, I'm using the skills Amanda's betrayal forced me to develop to help other employees find their own courage to speak truth to power. Every case I work reminds me that corporate criminals succeed only when good people remain silent. Amanda Sterling taught me that lesson the hard way, though I doubt she intended to. Her legacy isn't the executive success she'd planned to achieve, but rather the federal prison sentence that serves as a reminder of what happens when greed and arrogance override basic human decency. As for me, I wake up every morning knowing that my work matters, that my integrity means something, and that standing up to powerful people who abuse their authority can create lasting change. Sometimes the person who tries to destroy you ends up giving you exactly what you need to become who you were meant to be. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone tried to use their power to silence or intimidate you? How did you find the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it felt impossible? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to show your support for corporate whistleblowers and the courage it takes to expose wrongdoing. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when faced with seemingly impossible odds. Share this story with anyone who might need to hear that temporary setbacks can lead to ultimate triumph and that integrity always wins in the long run, even when the journey feels overwhelming. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your voice matters. Your integrity has value, and justice is always worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the people who try to silence you.